Congrats on getting beyond 1 million. What got you here won't always get you there. This is a podcast for entrepreneurs who want to reach beyond their 7-figure business and scale to 8, 9, and even 10 figures. I'm Brad Weimert, and as the founder of EasyPay Direct, I have had the privilege to work with more than 30,000 businesses, allowing me to see the data behind what some of the most successful companies on the planet are doing differently. Join me each week as I dig in with experts in sales, marketing, operations, technology, and wealth building. And you'll learn some of the specific tools, tactics, and strategies that are working today in those multi-million, 8, 9, and 10-figure businesses. Life can get exciting beyond 1 million. Tero Isokauppila, thank you for coming on, man. It's good to see you. It has been years since I've seen you. I hope I did not butcher your last name entirely.
No, that went well. It's great to reconnect. I feel like we met not a decade ago, but I want to say 8 years ago already at some of the entrepreneur events, and I haven't seen you since pre-COVID. Must be 2019 last time at some event. 2018, 2019?
Easily, and frequently in passing. And COVID, I feel like, was just a black hole, and it just, like, the time. Sometimes I feel like, oh, this thing happened 2 months ago, and actually it was 3 years ago, because that black hole just sucked reality away.
Totally. Couldn't agree more.
So in that period of time, a lot has happened from you. And I originally, when we met, I don't know where you were exactly in the journey, but it was still pretty early in Four Sigmatic. Can you give the timeline for Four Sigmatic and just some of the basic stats around that, whatever that means to you, revenue, employees, growth curve, et cetera?
Cool. Yeah. So I was born and raised in Finland and grew up on a farm. I'm a 13th generation family farmer. So me and my brother still manage the European farm. Luckily, it's only in the summer, so there's not that much work. So I can also gallivant around the world building businesses and whatnot. Lived in 10 countries. Four Sigmatic was launched already 10 years ago. It was originally supposed to be a lifestyle business. It was based in Hong Kong, no taxes, cool, get support, cash flow. And we've raised we've raised very little money, which is kind of rare. And Four Sigmatic is a CPG company, as people call it, consumer packaged goods. We make kind of elevated coffees, proteins, supplements, and then pretty quickly on, the company started getting organic traction, and then it was pretty clear that the main market was the US. So we re-domiciled the business into the US. So it's an American company now, and the whole team is based in LA. Really came here in 2015, launched in 2016, and had quite a bit of growth early on in podcasts, direct to consumer. And then over the last few years, we've been transitioning to more maybe diversified marketing strategy and retail. So we're now sold at Walmart, Target, Whole Foods, places like that. And the team is still pretty small. We try to keep it around 40 or under. So we outsource many of the business functions. So innovation, marketing tend to be some of the things the team is based out of. And we've been an 8-figure business for many years. And we don't have a valuation event, but it's probably a 9-figure valuation. So that's kind of it.
Awesome. So you started 10 years ago, so that was 2012. And the first few years were Hong Kong based. When you said that it got organic traction, what did that look like? And what was your initial go-to-market? And we'll talk about kind of the transition to the US, but what was your initial go-to-market?
Initial go-to-market, what we thought it would be and what we ended up being are two different things. So we are known for mushrooms, particularly mushroom coffee. And when you tell people mushrooms, people get weirded out. It's a weird concept. And especially 10 years ago, I think now they're having a real moment, partly with psychedelics, partly with the work we've been doing, educating. I've written a few best-selling books about them. There's some other people that have really made it more mainstream. But we thought we would go wholesale first, and we were going to certain retail channels. But retail buyers and you go to a large retail chain and they're like, what are these mushrooms? And I think our product also was probably not ready for mainstream appeal. So it became direct to consumer very quickly because there was a small niche audience that was aware or wanted to be aware of fungi and mushrooms. And those people we garnered them through online, through influencer marketing, and then later podcast marketing. So that's kind of where we started. So at very first it was retail, but pretty soon we pivoted into direct to consumer or some form of online sales.
Crazy. So initially it was retail. So you were working in the international market trying to get it into stores?
Yeah, and we did. We did get it to stores, and to the other question you asked, what does organic traction look like? It came in two ways. One was inbound. I think that's always a good sign for a young company. Inbound opportunities, inbound sales. So I guess from an online marketing point of view, you're having some sort of virality or word of mouth marketing or referral based marketing. This is also, I think, true for services. I think it's a very healthy sign that something you're doing is exciting, and or the people you've served will talk about you to other people. So even before we were in the US, we had all kinds of celebrities reach out to us that had heard from a friend of a friend of a friend. We were mentioned in American media outlets, even though we're not sold in the US. And then when we got to the US, kind of first we only had a subsidiary here, we became like, or Urban Outfitters reached out and said like, hey, we want to sell to you. Vogue reached out to us and wanted to make a story on us. Like a lot of weird stuff like that. We became eventually the first food product ever at Sephora, first food product ever at Ulta. These are things that are not normal for companies like us. So we had we had done something different, something unique, something, like we couldn't really capture the lightning in a bottle, what that was. Now I think we know, but back then it was just like we had these like breadcrumbs that seemed that there's something here that consumers are excited about.
And how quickly was that initial growth? Like what was revenue like year 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, it was like we wanted to double every year, and some years we tripled, but like that was kind of our mental model. But our first year was under $1 million. So we didn't have supply chain either, so we didn't have funding. So one limitation was working capital, which is pretty easy to solve if you know what you're doing. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's not easy to solve. But it was like every order, like I couldn't take a salary from the business for the first 2.5 years because every purchase order we made to purchase the products and packaging, then we got the revenue. We would make such a bigger order, it ate all our cash. So that was a limitation. But from sub-million to over $1 million and doubling there. And we were well into many 8 figures before like the growth we couldn't sustain it. There's a lot of reasons that stuff breaks depending what category, what sales channels you are. But there's a point somewhere in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million when stuff starts to break. Especially with physical products. I think with a digital funnels, because the delivery is different, you could probably sustain it into 100 million. But if with physical products, FDA, regulation, this and that, the complexity, you can fly under the radar for a while on certain things, but with both hiring people, the scale of operations, the types of partners you need to work with to produce that much product and to deliver that much product, it just, at some point, it's so we had to like realize that, doubling is not sustainable and we need to grow, still high clip, but like much more stable.
So let me back up for a second and talk about mushrooms, because you mentioned you had found something, and I think even to date, obviously I know you and I've known the brand, but I don't think of anything else when I think about mushroom coffee or mushrooms as a consumable. Immediately, Four Sigmatic is the brand. Were there competitors when you launched it, and what did the landscape look like?
We had some competitors. They were, there was a multi-level marketing company that was touting that mushrooms can do anything for your life, file for your taxes, take out your trash, all the stuff. And then there was some smaller brands that mostly in a capsule form that was, not very appealing to mainstream consumers. So I think both from a delivery, coffee was very interesting because it would hide the bitter flavors of these mushrooms in a convenient format. But also, I think from a marketing point of view, there wasn't, I guess there were some brands, but they were like pretty small and doing, I don't know how sophisticated overall. So that's kind of that.
So that was the landscape. Some people were out there attempting it, but not doing a very good job. And had you consumed mushrooms as in coffee before, or was this a part of your upbringing? Like, why did you decide to say, hey, let's make mushroom coffee and sell people mushrooms? And by the way, just for clarity here, the types of mushrooms are what, and what are the purported benefits of them?
Yeah. So I grew up in Finland. Finnish people consume more coffee than anyone else in the world, almost 3 times more than Americans, which is hard to believe, but that's possible. And then in the in the Second World War, Finland was both attacked by the Germans and the Russians. So there was a lack of coffee beans. So people started brewing an ancient botanical for us called Chaga. It's a mushroom that grows in a tree, birch tree in our backyards. And it tastes very much like coffee. It was used by our ancestors for other purposes. And it was a coffee substitute. And after the Second World War, University of Helsinki started studying its health benefits and found out that like a cup of chaga would equal to like 30 pounds of carrots and antioxidants. So that's where the idea came from. But it was also about opportunity. I was trying to sell these products in other formats, but the flavor was a real limitation for mainstream consumers or just almost about anybody getting on, because the real mushrooms taste really gnarly and very earthy, very bitter. And most people don't like bitters. The 2 bitters that people like are coffee and chocolate. So those became kind of hot chocolate, and coffee became the 2 ways to get in. So it was like my heritage meets an opportunity meets a problem, which I think a lot of ideas is that they're not linear, but they're some sort of a combination of domain expertise, maybe a customer problem, an opportunity on the market where some of the best ideas come from.
Out of curiosity, the Helsinki study, were you aware of that before you launched it, or did that come to be as you tried to put the marketing angle together for the product?
Because I'd used it for me. So I've coached professional athletes for almost 20 years in nutrition and optimal performance. So I was aware of these mushrooms and adaptogens for health purposes. And because one of these mushrooms, Chaga, grew up in Finland, I had looked into its health benefits. I had a friend who was also doing high achiever nutrition coaching, and he was really into it. And he did a lot of research and found it. So yes, I was aware before we launched. I was not aware of it as a kid of the studies.
Okay. So initially you went retail. Why did you pick retail instead of direct to consumer in 12? I mean, in 12, we have entered the e-com era, right? And it's certainly not in full swing the way it is now, but it was present, right? There were ways to get online, sell direct to consumer. Why was that the approach?
This is not the right approach, but the approach, my mindset was that at that point, I believe 99% of food, and I think something like 80-something% of supplements were sold in retail. So the market opportunity was bigger. Secondly, we were doing international, so we had language barriers. So like if you sell to Carrefour, which is, I think after Walmart, the largest grocery store in the world, it's French. So there's like limitations with languages. There's limitations with labeling. So using distributors and retail was a way able to scale quickly and reach more people. So that was the logic. I think that's a great logic if you're working on a familiar category where you're just 5% better, but we try to work totally different than what anything you would find in retail shelf, making it pretty complicated.
Got it. And so where were you in revenue when you moved to the US?
We were well over 1 million, but under 10. And some of that was already starting to be US revenue because we started even before we moved to the US. We had launched in Canada. So we launched in Canada before the US. So we already had like some accounts in the US as well. It started to become a halo effect and consumers wanted to buy it and whatnot. But like, yeah, we were over 1 million, under 10.
And how did you get exposure in the US? So you've passed 1 million, you're thinking, hey, we have some traction here. People seem to like the product. And the US, and ultimately the US ended up being the target. How did you get traction there in the first place?
We came in and we joined an accelerator. So we joined a food accelerator, met a lot of industry people. Even before moving to the US, I came here as a tourist and met about 200 industry experts through friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of friends. And every time I would meet someone, I would ask, who else should I meet? And I just basically like had coffee dates with professionals and I guess networking as people call it, but just ask a lot of questions to figure out and some of those were super helpful and some of them not so much, but that kind of informed me. And then some opportunities started landing. But and then once I got to the US, it was around being very active in the community and like meeting people, building relationships, telling my story. And what worked for us originally was different forms of influencer marketing. So luckily, whoever's your favorite health influencer, that health influencer's favorite health influencer was probably already at that point a raving Four Sigmatic fan. So we had like the experts were already into it. And we had this groundswell there. And then meeting different health influencers led to podcast opportunities, affiliate marketing opportunities, just general earned media exposure. And I think that's where it started getting traction.
And that was also an early era for, I mean, now again, influencer marketing is sort of a hot topic for people. And whether it's sort of macro influencers or micro influencers and just getting third-party validation from people. But that was pretty early to do it. How did those initial health experts find the product in the first place?
It's sometimes funny as hindsight is 2020, right? It's like, if you think of real estate and you're like, oh, I wish I would have bought this property 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you could have made all this money. Or stock picking, you're like, oh, I wish I bought Tesla when it was then. But if you go back in time and you look at what data was available, Tesla was expensive. And that property in the nice neighborhood in Austin, Texas was expensive. And at that point, for us, influencer marketing, even though now looking backwards, it was so cheap compared to what it is now and so affordable and so effective. I don't know if it's as effective today because people are wound up, but we thought it was too overpriced because we didn't have a lot of money. Like at this point, I'm barely paying myself minimum salary, like 30, 40K a year, just to barely scrape by. So it was all pretty much free. Like we didn't really pay for influencers until much, much later. I think Tim Ferriss was one of the first people we ever paid. And even those people we started paying for like podcasts or whatever, they were first fans. And then we kind of build upon it. But so it was a lot about, they reached out to us because they've heard of it through their friend, or I went to events or other places and was sampling products and then they showed up. So a lot of like health and wellness conferences type events, and then Instagram. So I would say those two, them reaching out to us.
Got it. So you were actively out in the target markets at live events, trying to get the product in people's hands?
Yeah. It was also part of like what I like to call paid R&D. And you can do this also online, but it's easier in person, is test out the value prop real time. And especially as a founder and CEO, it's so valuable to get feedback live. You can also adjust the questions you ask live. So I'm a huge proponent of in-person demos or in-person pitches in the way of like giving super valuable feedback quickly as you're trying to optimize your offering. And you can do this online as well, with not just with split testing, but more like community angles where you have a tight community where you can ask them for feedback, beta users, whatnot. But I think it's super helpful in the beginning. And even if your product and offering are ready, it will help you fine tune the pitch and fine tune the offer to really find the hook and what's relevant to the end consumer or end customer.
What is the process that you go through for that? So what's the how do you set the stage for that with people? Do you set the stage as, hey, here's free product, and then just kind of grill people with questions as they try it? Or do you have an organized approach to it?
3 ways how I did it. I'm not sure which one is the best. One is you don't say anything, or you try to say as little as possible to get a blank canvas approach. And that is around packaging or presentation. So that's kind of one expression. You could even do that in retail shelves. You could put packaging there and see if people grab it. That's very much like call unaided. So like, what is the unaided brand experience? So what happens? And that's often very different than the aided. And the aided is like people come to you and ask this, then you give your value prop or elevator pitch and see how they respond. And then, so that's the second, is the aided approach. The third one to me, which is around the aided but different, is I would try different, like I would yell if I'm doing a demo at Whole Foods or I'm in an event serving samples. I would try certain things to see how people react to them. It's like, hey, have you had mushrooms today? Or like, hey, it's like, you want mushroom coffee? Hey, I would test these certain things with enough many people to see how people react to them. You need to do this quite a bit to be realistic, and that's why online might be better. But it is an interesting way to test headlines or marketing messages in person. But it's more around just the capture of attention in that case.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that a little bit further. So initially you're doing these and you're at live events, or you're in presumably at the time, a small retail outlet, and you're getting feedback from people both on sort of the marketing message, but also on the product and the taste and the experience with the product, or the feeling of the product afterwards. If you fast forward to today, you're a decade in, and hundreds of millions of dollars of sales in, and how many customers do you know roughly?
We're truly omni-channel. We sell so much in retail, and we sell so much on Amazon through Vendor Central. So Amazon sends us POs instead of us selling as a seller on Amazon. So it's a real black box. But we know we've sold like 100 million of these servings of products. So and we have some clue of what an online buyer uses. So we can kind of reverse engineer it a little bit. It's in the millions, but I don't know if it's over 10 million consumers yet. I would think so, but I'm not quite sure.
So a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people have had the product.
Yeah, I guess so.
So at this point, do you still do those R&D, sort of human R&D studies where you're testing marketing lines with consumers, whether in retail environments or otherwise? And do you still do those for product research?
Them still, they're a smaller portion of our activities. They're really helpful for new products. And I do think we do target groups where you take a target customer, existing or potential target customer, and you give them samples or you show them stuff and you get feedback. We do those. But what I actually think is more helpful is somebody has to use their own money and own credit card to buy a product. So I do value actual consumer feedback more than a test consumer feedback. So we still do them, and they're helpful for new product launches. We're pretty much known to constantly innovate products. So those are helpful. But you get to a point where, and we've gone back and forth on this a little bit, but like you need to have a conviction at some point. And if your market is big enough and you ask too many people, you're going to start getting contradicting advice because of segmentation. Because like, if you bow to one direction, you're showing your ass to the other direction. So eventually you have to pick a lane. I guess this is where strategy comes in. So you got to choose, I'm going to stay in this segment, this geography, this target audience. And you kind of, at some point, you kind of a little bit have to have vision for the brand and what the company stands for. And listening to too much feedback can actually kind of be hurtful there. But if you know you're within your target demo, your target retailer, target geography, whatever it is, then it's helpful. but there's a risk that you listen to it. Like I makes me think of this example. One of our board members was one of the guys who built RX Bar, and in their packaging in the front they said no BS. And when before they launched, everybody was like, you can't say no BS because certain people don't like the letters B and the S because it's cursing or whatever. And they immediately, in a way, said no to that audience. But it didn't stop them from succeeding. So at some point, I guess, especially with branding and marketing, you gotta pick a lane and say, this is what we're really gonna focus at. And at times we make the mistake of trying to please too many people too many times, and it doesn't usually end up well, instead of like remembering what your conviction is. So I always encourage not just listening to feedback, but also like having conviction of your path and where the company's going.
I love that. That's good advice. And it's, I think it's easier to do when you are established because you don't have the same fear of absolute failure. And when you're young and when you're like your first 2.5 years to make a bold move when you're not pulling a salary and barely scraping by, that's a scarier proposition than when you're totally established, you're comfortable in life. You're not gambling your family by aggressive branding.
That's so true. But I would say the 2 times when you really need conviction is in the very, very beginning and once you get more established. The middle ground is where it can be dangerous because you could be blinded by the vocal minority could blind you from the silent majority. But I know it's in the beginning, it's scary, but that is what entrepreneurship is. And if in the beginning you don't have conviction and big risk taking, it's quite hard to succeed overall in any market. So you got to trailblaze a little bit in the beginning. And if you don't believe, who will? Because if you don't believe, then will your customers?
Tell me about the operational side of things. So when I think about CPG, I think about running the other direction for a lot of reasons, but one of them are sort of the supply chain, manufacturing, warehousing, logistics nightmares, packaging, labeling, especially internationally. All of that is stuff that I don't have to deal with. So walk me through specifically like how you started and if things changed at some point. Like, did you drop ship product originally? Did you have somebody that stored it and shipped it for you? A third-party logistics company get involved here somewhere? Like, what was the path and how did it transition from the early days to now?
Yeah, that's a great point. In CPG, I would say if you're an investor, unless you're super passionate about the space or you have domain expertise, don't invest in CPG. And then if you are thinking about starting the company, unless you're like, this is my dream and I love this so much, probably don't. Like, it is a tough industry. And so many people start making muffins at home and their neighbors like, oh, these are the best muffins. You should sell these muffins. And then you start selling the muffins and then you realize FDA, supply chain, food safety, all these stuff, right? Shelf life. But that being said, if you are in this space, there's ways to make it really difficult for you, particularly with things like that are frozen or not shelf stable and are heavy, like beverages. And then there's ways to make it a little easier. I guess coffee and protein powders are on the easier side. They're long shelf life, lighter weight, higher quality, higher price point for the weight. So they're a little more both D2C friendly, but also logistically easy. I knew from my past life of doing other businesses that I don't want to deal with the headache of manufacturing in-house, so having your own factory. Also, we didn't have money, but even if we would have had the money. So since day one, we've worked with third-party logistics and third-party contract manufacturing. So we buy the raw materials, we bring them in, but they pack it, and then we send it to a warehouse that ships it. It's costlier in the beginning, maybe, and requires some capital, But at the end of the day, it was very obvious to us is that I don't want to be the warehouse packing boxes and everything that comes with it and hiring people to pack boxes. And those are people you really, they're harder to manage day to day, that line of operation. So I was always thought like what scales and what makes me happy as an entrepreneur. So outsource manufacturing, outsource fulfillment was the way to go. And then choosing categories that are less of a headache. There's still a headache, but less of a headache from a shelf life, weight ratio.
And so is that the same, I mean, functionally the same structure that you use today?
Yeah. We pretty much, at some point we did it poorly, but we tried to do the same model. And then I called all my friends in the industry and asked who's the best person in this area. And then I found the best person that everybody pretty much recommended. And I called the person and I asked him, who do you learn from? And so I found the best person and their mentor, which usually sometimes the best person everybody recommends is in high demand and too busy. But if you find their mentor, they usually have bandwidth. And I found this guy who was an expert in operations and contract manufacturing and had done it for these massive brands, and convinced him to join the company. And he built a very scalable system with super high quality control and quality assurance policies. And I think that's really helped us. But, we've always tried to do the same model. We just did it poorly in the beginning because we were too cheap to hire a professional who can actually set it up in the right way.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So if you're looking at guidance and mentorship, looking to those that the guru learned from, I think is a good takeaway.
They're usually expensive and too busy. So usually working with them is for vanity and not for the actual outcome. Even if they are great, they tend to be a vanity hire more than a sound hire.
So from a product perspective, you talk about outsourcing logistics and manufacturing. What about like in the supplement world? So we support a fair amount of supplement companies, and today you get two camps of people. You get the I want to put my label on an existing product and white label it, right? And there's this whole ecosystem that has been fleshed out of drop shipping warehouses that just store a shitload of product that people can come and put their label on. And it's sort of like a business in a box done for you. And then you've got the other chunk of supplement companies that have formulators, and they spend tons of time formulating the product and going through iterations of what the product's going to look like, taste like, feel like, etc. Clearly, you're in the latter camp. This is a unique product. It's a new thing. Did you work with a formulator? Did you come up with it yourself? What have the iterations of the initial product line been like?
I'm a product founder, so I used to formulate for other brands as well and help them source ingredients. So that was my core expertise. So we've always formulated in-house. And even when we've hired a formulator, they work for the company. A couple times we've used experts in like new categories where we've then ask an expert to just give us like consulting advice because if there's some like pH issue or some like technical solution needed. But we've always done it in-house. And to your first point about two kinds of companies, it's spot on. There are people where it is a core competence and there's people who it's not a core competence. My experience is people who white label are either so new that they don't know even where to start. Therefore, they rely on someone else. To me, that's a problem because you will eventually have a lack of a moat in a competition. So you're going to put yourself in a glass ceiling. And the other types of people who white label, it's not their core business. So you're an Instagram influencer or you have a YouTube channel or whatever, you're a fitness coach, and that's your main thing. The YouTube is your main thing. The Instagram is your main thing. Oh, and I also want to upsell, but I don't want to deal with I don't want the supplements to become the only thing I do or the main thing I do. Therefore, it probably makes sense to just buy whey protein or creatine and put your own label on it because it's an upsell or it's a cross sell and it's a side thing. But if it is your main thing, I would probably recommend spending a little more time and effort on figuring out where your product comes from and how it's made and how are you different on the marketplace. Because with the white label, you will be a commodity, and eventually it will lead to just race to the bottom with price, race to the bottom with margin, and you're not controlling your own destiny. So it becomes a scale and business stability issue eventually, if it is. But if it is your side thing and you really don't care and it's a thing, it's probably smart to not make it too much of a headache and you'll white label.
How much? So this is a little tangential, but to your business, because this is not the case. But do you think consumers are aware of just how much product out there is literally exactly the same and it's just being white labeled?
They do not know. And it's funny, they don't know where it even comes from. There's all these like funny things, like they don't know how products are made. Like collagen is made by boiling skin of a dead animal and then scooped from the top, and vitamin C, pretty much like from all the supplements they probably almost all come from China. Even if you buy from an American brand that says manufactured in the US, it's made in China. If you ever bought vitamin C, it's pretty much all from China. And there's all these things. If you buy Norwegian salmon, it gets fished in Norway, gets shipped frozen into China, where it gets sliced and cut and packed and then shipped elsewhere. And there's all these things that happen in the supply chain that are actually kind of heartbreaking once you start to learn about them, because you become pretty jaded of how the world works. And if you would be a consumer, it would probably in many cases break your heart to know what you're actually consuming, which is why I do recommend that, especially with ingestibles, that at some point in your life, you should kind of audit what you're ingesting and spend a little more time and not trust some, Instagram influencer alone to know what you're putting in your body, and learn at least like 80-20 and learn about some of these things. I think it would serve you well. It doesn't need to become an obsession, but it probably will serve you and your family quite a bit.
Yeah. I went out, I took our team out to see Joe Rogan downtown do stand-up, and he does stand-up pretty much every week downtown in Austin. And at some point, part of his bit was about him being like grilled by the government and actually Prince Harry about giving what was the term that they used? Like bad health advice for COVID. There was I keep thinking fake news because of Trump, but that's not the term they used. Anyway, pushing out inaccurate data. And Rogan was like, at first he was like, shit, did I give out inaccurate data? That was like his first thought. And then he thought, wait a minute, who the fuck is taking health advice from me? If you're getting health advice from Joe Rogan, you should reevaluate where you're getting your advice from. So I think that your guidance there is spot on. You probably shouldn't look to the influencers for health advice. But I also want to know about other weird shit that's bad.
Can I say about that?
Like, yeah, totally.
Work with Joe on his podcast, and I would say he probably knows truly more than 99.9%. So even though Joe is right in principle, he is really smart, and he's spent decades learning about this. Like, he's probably been one of the first ones on nootropics, one of the first ones on supplement, this and that. And he learns from people. He has access to the best experts. So he might say that he doesn't know. He actually knows. And like way more than many health experts that truly are trying to pretend to be health experts, like Joe Loki knows more. So just wanted to get that off. I know he's being humble, but he's actually quite the expert.
Well, he's being humble, and he's also fucking around in his stand-up, right? And it's also sort of a defense mechanism to deal with all the chaos. But I tend to agree with you. He owned Onnit for a decade with Aubrey, and it's a high-end nootropic supplement company that sold recently. But yes, but I think the point was still good, and I'm glad that you pointed that out. What are the other big flags that you know about in ingestibles, mushrooms or other supplements or otherwise, that would shock people?
On the mushroom side, there's a recent study a couple of years ago published, a USP study about the authenticity of products, and it found that 74% of reishi supplements, reishi is one of the more common mushroom supplements, so 74% of the reishi supplements sold in the US don't contain any reishi. Like, that happens. So you buy a supplement, you think it's A, it's not A. So that's super common. There's tainted supplements, pretty common as well, particularly in like bodybuilding, pre-workout, post-workout products. So that also happens when, like, oh, this product works so well. And then you find out in the labs that it's because of a PED, so kind of a performance enhancing drug that is in the product, therefore it works. So that happens. But there's also a lot of examples of those in everyday consumables, just on grocery items where there's a lot of conscious or unintended misleading, either with product claims or product labeling. So, and FDA even allows even calories to be, I think, up to 20% off. So if you're super strict about your macros and you're trying to read the label, they literally can be 20% off and they're totally safe and fine. So I could probably give you 100 examples of that, and I don't want to scare people because, they're still fundamentally good things. But it is a business. And in many cases, if you follow the money, it will explain a lot of things, like a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a good rule in general in life, is to figure out where the truth is, follow the money. I mean, that's how capitalism works. Okay, so how do you, and this is kind of a two-part question, but how do consumers know what's quality and what's not quality? What are tips or tricks to that? And then kind of part and parcel with that is, how do entrepreneurs market in a way that, how do you market truthfully that's in also an effective way to convey that to consumers?
As a consumer, it depends on what you're buying, but I'll give you a couple guidance. If you are buying non-organic, you are getting pesticides 100% of the time. If you're buying organic, you might not, some of them might lie or cheat about organic, but I think you're getting not pesticides 90% of the time. So labels are not perfect, be it gluten-free, organic, keto, this and that. That we can find exceptions where somebody said it was keto and then it ended up not being keto when you tested your blood work. But usually those are good indicators, of directional indicators, because the opposite will mean for sure it's high in sugar or it's in pesticides. So take labels with a grain of salt, but they do give you guidance. The other thing I would say is, if the product is new and it has less reviews or whatever, you have to do a little more work and digging. If a product, let's say Bragg's apple cider vinegar, has existed for a long time, you're pretty solid that it is apple cider vinegar. One of smaller tick I like is Costco actually is probably the most safe place to buy. Not everything there is healthy, but what you're buying is what you're getting. So Costco, without going into the details, is pretty much the only retailer that validates the whole supply chain. So if you buy extra virgin olive oil in Costco, it is extra virgin olive oil in Costco. You could go to many fancy stores and buy extra virgin olive oil where it actually is cut. So it's part olive oil, part other oils. So there are ways how you can use. So you go to Amazon and look at products that have, thousands of reviews. There are usually good indicators. I usually look at the 2 and 3 star reviews, which is also a good rule as a business owner, because the people who give a 5-star review, I don't know if they're real or if they're just in the hype train. People who give a 1-star review trash anything. It's the 2 to 3 star reviews who wanted to like the product, but had something about it that they didn't like. So they were not fanatic on either end. They wanted to love it, but didn't. And then figure out why they didn't love it. And this is great, I think, great rule for general market research as well. If you're checking out competitors or categories, is look at successful products that sell a lot and look at their 2 and 3 star reviews.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I love it, man. Well, we could keep going for a long time, but in the nature of being productive in my office on Friday as I have to go operate the business, where can people find out more about you or about Four Sigmatic or wherever you want to point them?
Four Sigmatic is pretty much everywhere, from retail to online to TikTok to YouTube to Instagram to Facebook. So it's FOURSIGMATIC. And then I'm not in many places. I'm on Instagram at I am Tero, TERO. And then I write books, so you can buy them wherever books are sold, from Barnes and Noble to Amazon to wherever. So if you want to go check out, I write books about mushrooms and adaptogens mostly. So if you want to read more about for health and wellness, you can go maybe buy a book.
Tell me about your children's book real quick.
Oh, I do have a children's book called Santa Sold Shrooms, and it tells the original, truth story of Santa Claus and where Santa Claus comes from. And the kicker is that it's around a legal psychedelic mushroom called Amanita muscaria, which is the red mushroom with white dots you see on Super Mario and as an emoji and on Disney stuff. And everybody kind of knows the mushroom, but they don't know the story. Similar to Santa, people misconceive the story. So I wrote a children's book through the lens of a young little girl and her family, learning about where Santa comes from and the history of it. So you can also get that on Amazon or wherever.
Santa Sold Shrooms. Get it for your kids today.
Yeah.
Love it. Tero, it's been great, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Brad.
If you learned one thing on this episode, share it with another entrepreneur. They need to hear it. Also subscribe so that new episodes just show up on your phone. It's a lot easier that way. And if you want the really good stuff, check out our free BAM! Tactics and Strategies course. It's where we curate the best tips, tricks, and tools that our guests know, whether they've shared them on the podcast or not. Just go to beyondamill.com. You'll also find previous episodes and show notes at beyondamill.com.